This time we are in Luke 13, and we're going to be looking at verses 10 to 16 and taking a look at some of the things that are happening in those verses. So take your mobile device, your computer, your Bible, whichever you have, and let's look at those verses. Let's begin in Luke 13, verse 10, and I will be reading the King James. And he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And behold, there was a woman which had a spirit of infirmity 18 years, and she was bowed together and could in no way lift up herself. So first of all, what we want to notice is it is Jesus teaching. And where is he? He's in a synagogue, and he's in a synagogue on Sabbath. This is important, but I don't want to spend time on that particular issue because we've discussed Jesus and his synagogue lifestyle back in segments 27 and segment 30. So please go back to those videos and refer to some of those teachings. So let us take a look at these verses. What we do know is in verse 12 and verse 13, Jesus does heal her, but like in the previous teachings, we are not focusing on the healing. What we are focusing on is the things around it and what's happening. So the focus that we want to look on is the response to what Jesus did. And the response is very much about Torah and Torah interpretation and Torah application. And that's been the focus that we've been having since we've been engaged in this study since the start of the Torah rotation this year. So in verse 14, notice the synagogue ruler. So again, we're in a synagogue. There's a person who's in control of that synagogue, and that person has a response. That ruler of that synagogue responds with indignation, and it is because Jesus healed on the Sabbath day. Now, the synagogue ruler says to the people who are there at the synagogue in this attendance, "There are 6 days in which men ought to work. In them, therefore, come and be healed, and not on the Sabbath day." Now, the interesting thing is the synagogue ruler's interpretation and his statement is correct based upon the way in which the man is interpreting Torah. So, we go back to the fourth commandment. You find that in Exodus 20, beginning with verse 8. It says this: "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But in the seventh day, the Sabbath of the Lord, which is Yud He Vav He, your God, you shall do no work. Not you, not your son, not your daughter, not your manservant, not your maidservant, not your cattle, nor your stranger that is with you within the gates. For in 6 days the Lord, Yud He Vav He, made heaven and earth, the sea, all that is in them, and rested on the seventh. Therefore, the Lord, Yud He Vav He, blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it," meaning he set it apart in order to bring special attention to that day. And that type of commandment is what the synagogue ruler is making his statement based on. And you can find similar wording of this commandment over in Deuteronomy 5, beginning with verse 12 down to verse 15. So the synagogue's ruler's statement is basically saying there are 6 days in which men are to work. Do your work in those days, come in on those days and be healed. Do not do work as healing or come for healing on the Sabbath day. So in a sense, he is keeping with the commandment as it was written. And we've discussed Sabbath and work and the issues surrounding that back in segment 32 and 33, if I have my segment numbers correct. And it's important because what is work and what is Sabbath and how do you do these things? And this argument continues here in this section, here in Luke 13. So Jesus is forced by this moment to revisit this argument, and it is all about a specific interpretation of the Torah, because that's what the synagogue ruler responds with. So, how is Jesus going to respond this time? That's important. First of all, it could be argued that Jesus himself is being a little bit indignant. I'm going to say that's a possibility, but that's not the focus of our study, and probably is a discussion in and of itself. So we're not going to give it our focus. What we want to look at is Jesus and his argument. So the response that Jesus gives is found in verse 15 and 16. So back in segments 32 and 33, Jesus argued about animals being trapped, but that's not what he's doing here in this segment. In this segment, he says, you untie your animals, you lead them by walking them, and then you water them all on Sabbath. So all of these things are very specific interpretations of what it means to work on the Sabbath. So he's saying you have to do all of this stuff, all of this work on Sabbath to do good to your animals. All right? Well, there's a parallel that's happened here, and it's healing this lady. So he's saying the parallel of that is doing good to people. So Jesus states an example, but he doesn't articulate it in words. He goes, you do this work, but you won't allow this to happen. So he is articulating these things in a way that they go, oh, this is what this means. Because take a look at the response down in verse 17. But we are not, most of us in the church are not in a circumstance where we are being guided or taught or instructed from the law of Moses, the Pentateuch. So we don't initially grasp the major discussion that's happening right here in this verse. A lot of people are going to think that the synagogue ruler is being a legalist. He's just doing this and that and the other thing. Well, that's not entirely true, because if even those who are, I'll use the word liberal, because we had used the word legal with this other fellow, those who are being liberal with the Bible still are looking to the Bible and looking for interpretation. So in a sense, both of them are being legalist, because they're going, what's the legal writing of the Bible have to say? So legalist is not the argument. What the argument is interpretation. The text says this, what does it mean? That's what we're working with. So Jesus says, okay, on the Sabbath day, you take your animal, which is tied, you walk them over, you water them. But you're telling me I can't heal somebody. Jesus is saying, when you have done good to the animals by doing that work, you can also do good on the Sabbath to heal a person. So what does all of this mean? We need to take into context the context which sets around a healing motif like this. Because the argument is not about, oh, Jesus healed this person and he is a master healer. Because even though that is true, the context surrounding it is, what does the Torah say and how do we live it? So what we want to point out again with this video is that Jesus knows his Torah, and that Torah reading and interpretation is a major issue with his ministry. Here's what we also need to know. For the Jew, for the Israelite, the Torah is the foundational teaching. And thus, Jesus, or Yeshua, as a Jew, as a rabbi, is teaching and expounding and clarifying what it means for an Israelite and a Jew to live Torah, to live by the instructions that Moses has given as they live their life before God. And this becomes very powerful. This becomes very important. And this becomes an additional reality of Jesus and his ministry. And this is something that we should focus on.